Oh, just let me
That clock keeps ticking like a metronome, and my thoughts keep telling me to get me home, but my balls keep telling me to let me just let me
Welcome to part 1 of a 3-part review series of the Parnis Panda Daytona, a watch that has been requested to be reviewed by a few of my audience members. And after seeing what they have done to this watch and how they have created such a good homage to its Rolex counterpart, I could not deny it. And I can honestly say I've never sworn out loud when I've unpackaged a watch, but this watch made me swear when I opened it up, because it is, I'm going to say it is one of the most beautiful watches I've ever seen. So, if you're new to my channel, welcome. In this first part, the initial impressions, I'm going to talk about the watch after having owned it for less than 24 hours. I've owned this watch for about 3 hours, and I've brought some thoughts together. The second part, part 2, will be the design review, where I'll go into more detail about the watch's wearability, the watch's accuracy, looking at the watch from a designer's perspective, comparing it to its Rolex counterpart. And in part 3, the closing thoughts section, I'll be talking about the watch after having owned it for a few weeks and wearing it, and really come up with some closing ideas of what I think about the watch altogether. So with all that being said, let's get into the video. I mean, what else needs to be said? Really, I'm at a loss for words. This is beautiful. It is so beautiful. And there are a couple of things that I'm going to save for the design review when I talk about why I think this is such a faithful homage to its Rolex counterpart. There are tiny little nuances that they've done to this watch that have made it their own, and they've really taken some interesting design cues. So, let's get into the watch. General dimensions and specifications: we have a 40mm case diameter, we have a 20mm lug width, 12mm case height, with a very attractive, highly polished case that actually has a rounded edge to it, so it's not flat like your standard oyster style models. It has a protruding bubble back case back that is screwed down and is solid end links that have been recessed into the case. The watch comes with a double deployant trigger actuated clasp, which is very nice, quite robust. I've never experienced this clasp before, but I'll talk about that in a later stage. If I bring the dial closer, you can see the bezel, the ceramic bezel that is highly gloss in greater detail. And if I bring it really close, the printing is phenomenal. There is not a piece of print that is out of line. It looks superb. If we look at the dial, it has a matte white dial, but it does in fact have a silver hue to it. So when you hold it in certain lights, it has a very nice refractive quality that picks up the light very well. Inside we have 3 sub-dials, all of which are a deep glossy black. And as you can see, they are inset silver rings on the outside and the inside of the dial, of each of the sub-dials, which looks so good. Another detail that I picked up when I saw the watch initially. If you look at the hour and the minute hands, you can see it's silver with a black line set on the inside as well as luminova. The watch is missing numerals at the 3, 6 and 9 position, which makes the watch really interesting. And I plan on, when I get into the design review, I plan on talking about how I think this watch has really sorted out its balance. The only text on the dial is Parnis Chronograph, as you can see at the 12 o'clock position. In place of a Rolex coronet, we have a triangle that's facing downwards, which I really like. It's really appealing. Just overall, this watch looks beautiful. You can't deny it. It is stunning. And you can see how the light plays on that dial when it catches it. It's not a matte, flat color. It actually picks up a silvery hue to it overall. Discussing the movement, this watch uses a Seiko Mecha Quartz, a VK64 if I'm not mistaken. If you look at the 6 o'clock position, you can see that the hand is ticking away and not beating away. But what I've noticed is that the hand hits the marks very well on the sub-dial. If we look at the 3 o'clock position, it has a 24-hour time, and at the 9 o'clock position we have a 60-minute timer, which is set and will only move when I start the chronograph itself. Looking at the bracelet, I can say compared to the other Parnis models, this bracelet has been executed with much more accuracy. Detail has been covered well. And going to the clasp, this is the first time I've ever seen a deploying clasp like this on a Parnis model. I know this has become popular with their lineup. Personally, I find it a little bit aggressive for what the watch is. I think it looks something that would be more useful on a heavy-duty tool watch like a dive watch. But this is okay for the time being. It'll be interesting to see how it wears over the next few days. So you simply push the double deployment button and releases the clasp. It looks a little bit grimy in there, so let me try and wipe it out. So you can see when you push these two little actuators, it opens it up. We look on the inside. I still have plastic on the inside, but it has a very nice perlage on the inside there. And the milled steel section has been cut very well. It's very light too, which I like. They've reduced the metal down as much as possible. I'm interested in knowing why this is such a prominent section for the movement, and we can experiment looking at this together. Yeah, this I don't understand why this is necessary. What this could be is just added rigidity to the overall build of this frame. I'll have to look at it more and try and work it out. But what I must say is that the clasp itself has been rounded off excellently. There are no sharp edges. I do have the plastic on the edge of this, but there are no sharp edges for your hands to get impacted on. And if I turn it around, we can see it has a 3 micro adjustment section and does in fact have a pull out 5mm extension. As you can see, I've just pulled it out. And then you just turn it back in, close it in on itself. The very reassuring click, listen to that again. Pull it out, returning. That is very reassuring. I'm impressed. Nice choice. I don't know so much about the engraved Parnis logo on the clasp, but anyway, it's good. Awesome. I don't have any faults with this watch. I am so enamored by it. It's made me rethink a lot about the watches that I have in my collection because it is stunning. And what I love is the fact that it is a quartz movement. Because I can barely see the second hand, I don't worry that it is a quartz movement. The only time I really worry that it's a quartz watch is when I see that big second hand ticking. When it's a subdial and at a glance you could barely even notice that it is ticking, I think a quartz is awesome, just for the sake that you don't have to worry about setting it. I've noticed something interesting about the minute track at the 9 position. As you would expect with a mechanical watch, once this chronograph hand passes the 12 o'clock position, you expect this hand to jump to the next position, but it doesn't. It actually flows independently like you would see the minute hand track on the dial. So if I show you this up close, you'll be able to see this now. Now we would expect this hand to jump the second this hand hits the 12 o'clock position. But it doesn't. It stays still. And what you'll notice is that while this hand follows around the dial, so this hand will move slowly to the 15. Fascinating. I'm learning as I go. Overall, I can say with absolute certainty that this is the most attractive looking Parnis watch I've ever seen. The details are excellent. The execution so much better than the other models that I've looked at in the past. Just overall. And what I can say as well is that I've never thought that I'd say this, but this watch really looks good on an oyster bracelet, and I might just leave it on an oyster bracelet. I will experiment by putting it on a Jubilee like I do with most of my models, but this watch works well with an oyster. Let's get this watch on the wrist. I mean, how good does that look? Like, really, how good does that look? A common complaint I normally have with Parnis models is the end links. I find that the end links stand out too proud of the watch. But dealing with 40mm cases, and this model especially, I think the end links sit perfectly well. You have a 7-inch wrist for your reference. Look at the profile. It is so low in profile, it's like a dress watch. And I think the Mecha Quartz really helps in lowering the watch's overall presence, which is excellent. And if I rotate the watch around, we see how it's placed on the wrist. It is very comfortable. Oh, it's unbelievable. So let's get it off and have a look at the actual chronograph. Looking at the dial one more time, let's disengage the chronograph. So you can undo these pushes. They are screw down pushes. Push it in. Has a very interesting sound to it. Let's see if I can do it closer for you to listen to. It doesn't feel like a mechanical movement would. It doesn't have that hard click that you would expect, but it does. It's a very reassuring feeling. It's not anywhere near as hard as a mechanical, like a column wheel chronograph would feel. It's very smooth to the touch, which is quite nice. So we stop it, and the reset, because it is a mecha quartz, generally a quartz movement would have this chronograph hand move all the way around the dial before it resets, but with this, resets back to 0 perfectly, and there it is. Screw down the crowns. One thing I've noticed is that this watch doesn't have a screw down main crown. The crown itself is free and independent, which is a bit of an issue. I think it's a bit of a deal breaker, but in saying that, for a mechanical movement it makes sense to have a screw down crown. With a quartz movement, I guess this was to help with manufacturing. It's a little bit more difficult to combine a screw down crown with a quartz movement, so I guess this makes sense. Just overall, this watch is so attractive. It's stunning. It really is. And I can say this to any of you who are interested in the Rolex Daytona. If you're on the waiting list for the next 5 years, then I think this is an excellent alternative. It might come to a point that when you get the real one, you will choose to put it in the safe and to wear this on a daily basis. Because talking about the specifications of the watch, you have a ceramic bezel, you have a sapphire crystal, you have a mecha quartz movement that is going to be accurate within 5 seconds over a month period. Has a solid case, solid end links, beautifully polished, excellently finished, and the dial design, in my opinion, is more attractive than the Rolex chronograph dial design, which I will get into at a later stage. But just look at it. There's something to behold. I don't think I'll be taking this watch off for the next week. Thank you all for joining me in this first part of the 3-part review series. I hope to bring out the design review very soon. To all my new subscribers, thank you for joining, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers for now.